So you might have been able to pick up from the psalm we read earlier, or from the hint in that prayer right there, that we're talking about money in some sense today. And we're doing this by continuing on with our series, by exploring the words that Jesus has said through Luke. And we're continuing on in the same context that we've been spending the last 2 weeks in. Jesus was at a party, and at this party was gathered a bunch of people that the Pharisees and the lawyers and the religious elite scoffed at and were judgmental of. It was those people that were unsavory, those people who had a sordid past, those people who were tax collectors, those people that were traitors, those who had professions that were unsavory and it's uncomfortable to even mention in church. It was those people that were looked down upon by the good people, and I say that in air quotes. And they were objecting and they were murmuring to themselves, and Jesus starts into this 2-chapter long set of parables and teachings in order to confront this. He starts out and says a parable of the lost sheep, right? This is one you may be familiar with, right? Where there's 99 sheep that are safe in the field and one wanders off, and the shepherd goes and finds it. When he finds it, he brings it back, and he has a big party because he is so elated over the fact that something that was lost and for all intents and purposes dead to him was restored to him alive. Right? And this is him Jesus pushing back against these Pharisees, against the religious elite that were being judgmental and scoffing at Jesus for focusing and spending time on the outcasts of their culture. Right? Then he tells another parable, the parable of the lost coin, and tells about a woman who lost one of her 10 coins, a valuable coin. And so she stops everything. She stops her entire day to clean her entire house, to look in everything. She lights lamps so there's plenty of light in the house, burns oil, and redevotes her entire day in order to find this lost coin. And when she finds it, her reaction is the same as the shepherd, in that she is elated and celebrates the fact that something was lost, something that she didn't know if she would get back, something that was precious to her was found. Right? Are we noticing a theme? Right? We should. That's the entire point of these. And so then Jesus continues on and tells the parable of the lost sons, or the prodigal sons, or like there's a few different names, but I'm trying to draw the point that it's 3 parables about something that are lost, lined up in a row in order for Jesus to push back. And he tells this parable of this son who squanders the wealth of his father in a way that's insulting to the father, and he goes off to a far country and he just blows it all and ends up in a tough situation, as people often do when they squander their wealth. And he decides it'd be better to live as a slave with my father than to be abroad and to have no one that cares for me at all. And as he comes back, the father has been looking for him, spots him from a distance, rushes out, and is overwhelmed with compassion over the state of his son, more than anger at anything that the son has done against him, because the son has slighted him. But also in that same moment, as he is celebrating, just like the shepherd with the sheep, just like the woman with the coin, just as the father is celebrating the fact that his son has been returned to him, his son who was gone, this reunion and this restoration of this relationship that had broken down and has been restored, the older son, who has done what is right, is then angry and then walks away from the father. And once again, the father goes out to the son to try to restore that relationship, to restore the son, the elder son, who is now lost to him, who is now there is a divide. And it's this beautiful picture of the overwhelming compassion of God, and the fact that God delights and deeply yearns for those that are lost from him to be restored. God yearns deeply for those who have been lost to return for him. And so this is the progression of these parables. This progression of each scenario that all is focused at these Pharisees who are mocking the fact that Jesus is sitting there with those who are far from God and are lost or are making bad decisions, with the outcasts, the not good people. And so then Jesus hops into this fourth parable. So this is a unique parable. And I'm going to set this up a little bit, but I wanted to make sure, so Jesus has told 3 parables in a row about the lost, about how excited God is when those that are lost are returned. And then he comes into this parable. This parable is unique to Luke. So it's one that we don't encounter as much. It's one where what we expect to happen in the story doesn't if we're paying attention. And so what we're going to do is we're going to spend a couple of weeks, at least a couple of weeks. We might end up doing 3 weeks on this. And we're going to go through the entire thing, and we're going to start pulling layers off. And we're going to kind of get the low-hanging fruit first, and we're going to start digging into this because this is deep, this is rich, it has deep implications for how we view our world and how we operate in it and what our priorities are and how our priorities reflect God's. So that's the plan. So let's hop into it. You'll quickly get what I'm saying. So Jesus told the disciples. So he was kind of telling these parables to the Pharisees, and then he kind of redirects and speaks to his disciples. But the Pharisees are still there because we see them react to this story a little bit later. And he says this. So Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions, being frivolous in the spending of the house, right? So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be my manager any longer, right? This man is going to be called to task for the squandering of the goods, the mismanagement of this rich man's house. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master has taken away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. Right? So this manager, he's got a problem. Right? He has behaved and has mismanaged, or his whole point, his whole job is to manage this rich man's estate, and he has not done that well. And so he's going to lose his job. And he's worried because what skill set is he going to fall back into it, right? So he legitimately has a problem, regardless of the fact that he got himself into that, but he has a problem. So he comes up, this is how he reacts. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. Right? So he's coming up with a scheme. He's come up with an idea in order to figure out how people will welcome him after he's cast out of the rich man's house, how he can live off the good graces of those other people in the future. So he's come up with a scheme, he's come up with a plan in order for other people to welcome him around. Okay. So he called in each one of his master's debtors, the people that owed his master something. He asked the first one, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Like, hurry, before I lose my job, come here, let's do this. Let's take this debt and let's change the numbers. Let's do some creative accounting here, and let's change it from 900 to 450. Then he asked the second one, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800, right? So some creative accounting here is going on again. This manager is using his little remaining time to wipe away debt from people that owe money to the master. The manager came up with a dishonest, right? This is dishonest. They didn't pay it back. This is manipulative, right? He is manipulating them so that once he's kicked out of his master's house, they will be so grateful for the fact that he wiped away that debt that they'll let him stay there in their good graces, right? So, if we were watching a movie, imagine we were watching a movie and this was going on. And we know that this meeting is coming up between the rich owner and this dishonest manager. We would be like, all right, he's finally, like, this will be great. This is the scene we've been looking for the entire movie where he is going to get what he deserves. Like, it's all going to come crashing down on him, and this is going to be great. Like, this is what you expect. A dishonest person, he does these things, he's already been mismanaging, he's losing his job over it, and then he does this despicable, manipulative acts just so he can have an easy life the rest of his life by doing this dishonest thing. And then the master condemned, no, that's not what that word is. Commended the dishonest manager. What? The master commended, right? So everyone that would have been sitting there in that room listening to the parable that Jesus was told would have been expecting a very different word right there. Brought the wrath of God, smited him, like whatever, like you strung him up, crucified him, whatever the word would have made sense. Like he not commended, not praised him. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly, which shrewdly is a weird word for him to use too. Where do we hear that word? What is it associated with? Any input from the audience? What was that? With dishonesty, right? What animal is more shrewd than all the other animals? The snake in the garden, right? This would have, like Jesus saying this man was shrewd, would have brought up that image in the Garden of Eden of the snake tempting Eve. Right? This parable, when you get to this point, you should be like, what is going on? Why is the master commending this person? Because he's shrewd? Another wrinkle to the shrewd thing that I'll just toss in here. In Matthew, when Jesus sends the disciples out, he says, I'm sending you as sheep among wolves. Be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. So at some point, Jesus says, you should be that way. So there's a huge wrinkle here in this. This is a huge subversion of what we should expect to happen here. All right, I just want to make sure that tension's there. Okay, the master commended him. We do want to say that the master did not commend him for being dishonest. The master did not commend him for being manipulative, but he commended him on his shrewdness, on changing his behavior and acting in a way and having a plan based upon the circumstances that changed. We'll continue on. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly, what we just talked about. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light, right? Jesus is saying. So Jesus has finished the parable, and now he's talking about, okay, this is kind of how it applies. He finished the parable with the line saying that the master commended this guy. So it's just mind-boggling. You want to see the resolution of how this guy gets what he deserves. You want to see what happens when he's trying to live off the good graces, but we don't. It's left up in the air. We just see that the master commends him for acting shrewdly. And then Jesus goes on to talk about being shrewd. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Okay? That's fair. I'm just going to read this sentence again, and we're going to... Yeah. And this is what's so brilliant about Jesus' parables, right? Is they mess us up so much that we can't help but think about them. Yeah. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. All right. So let's step back to the beginning, okay? Right. This man, he was mismanaging the money of his master, and he was just going along, living his best life, spending money however he wanted. Then something changes, and he knows that his time is now limited at his current situation. And so it changes the way he views the remaining time he has. Well, he totally then, yes. Yeah, regardless, he has an outlook change, right? There's a shift in him. He wasn't wiping debt away before, and then all of a sudden he has to come up with a plan so he can be welcomed in other people's houses. And so he then starts wiping away debt, knowing that will earn good graces. He was living his life a certain way, and something happened, and it causes his mindset to change from it thinking it'll be like this always to it's actually just a short time I have. Let's use it in a way that has a longer lasting impact. And that's why we're coming back next week, and we're going to hit it again. Right? This is an onion. We're going to pull layers off. Okay? Right? No, you're fine. We're going to pull layers off this because this is deep, and this is unsettling, and it's disruptive, and it's everything I love about Jesus' teachings. Because if we're not being messed with and challenged, then we're probably not going to grow from it. This is one, I love this parable because of this reason, because of that reaction right there. And so Jesus is saying, use your temporary worldly wealth to gain friends, because it will be gone, and when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Change the way you perceive and view your money, your temporary temporal wealth that you have right now, and change it, and change the way you view it, and change the way you spend it, change the way you utilize it, so it has an eternal impact, right? This man had a very short-sighted, I'm going to just live for the moment, and it caught up with him. And then he changed the way he used his resources so that it would have a much longer impact. Jesus is saying, change the way you view wealth from just a temporary, use it for my own benefit, so that when it's gone, right? Just as we read in those parables, just as we realize that we're not taking it with us, that it has eternal impact. Seek first the kingdom, right? Invest in things that can have an eternal impact. Jesus is talking about a mindset change. Jesus is talking about priorities. Jesus is talking about what we love, and we'll get to that. So hopefully you're seeing some of this transition, and like I said, we're going to be pulling layers off. We're going to sit on this for a while, and it should be disturbing. This is a disturbing parable. It's got some unsettling implications. Our worldly wealth could have an eternal impact. All right? And we're talking longer than just 401k retirement. We're talking like our worldly wealth, how we use it, could have an impact that reaches beyond us. Interesting. Right? So let's continue on. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, right? And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. What we do in the little things matters, right? Did you have a... It's all right. We're going to sit in this a while. So, like, if it's crystal clear right now, I would be surprised. That's fine. These are things that the longer we spend in prayer and let mess with us, the more that is mined out, and the more better it is, to say it in bad English. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, yes. Yeah, let's map the characters in the parable then, okay? So, he was. The master is God, and then this dishonest manager would be someone we can relate to. Yeah. Correct. And the man still lost his job. The dishonest manager still was kicked out of the master's house. Right? There was still repercussions. But the thing that the master did commend him, it didn't say there wasn't repercussions. He did commend him on changing his mindset and being so shrewd that he was welcomed into the... It was dishonest. He's not commending the dishonesties. He's commending the fact that he was so shrewd. Like we're going to sit in this a few weeks just for this reason, because it's unsettling, okay? So, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much, right? If you're hiring someone, if someone has a history of mismanaging things, you're not going to hire them, right? If you have worked beside someone as peers, and you know they're cutting corners in every way, when you get up to be, if you get promoted, you're probably not going to promote them in the future, because you know that when they're in a position that they have more authority, they're just going to cut more corners and be dishonest in more things, right? We understand this in principle. And Jesus is laying this out also here. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, now he's drawn a parallel between small, temporary things and not being able to be trusted with large, eternal things. He's drawn that parallel between worldly wealth and eternal riches, with true riches. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, if we have squandered what God has given us in this day and age and have not done something with it that might impact eternity, as we've been given an opportunity, as Jesus is inviting us to now, then why would, there's repercussions, is what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, let's change the way we view things, right? How we steward things now has a chance to impact eternity. And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Right? No one will, right? This is, and Jesus is just saying, change the way you view things. Change the way you view things. Change the way you view things from it's just temporary money that we have right now, it's here today and gone tomorrow, into how could I invest it into something longer term that impacts even eternity. And he goes on to say this: no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money, right? We have a priority in our life. There's a number one in our life. And we live in a culture that is obsessed with money. Right? That our nation, we determine whether it's going good or bad based on the GDP, how much money is flowing through it, right? We don't talk about suicide rates. We don't talk about happiness. We don't talk about other quantifiers that may actually be better gauges of whether our country is doing well or not. GDP is the overarching thing that we quantify the success or failure of our country, right? We live in a culture that is obsessed with money, right? When we encounter someone, we do the whole back and forth. We'll exchange names. So what label do I call you by? And then what do you do? And associated with that is the internal calculation that happens in our culture of what's their worth? What do they make? What value do they bring to society? We don't have to like that, but that's what happens, right? I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's the reality of what happens. And we live in a culture that just worships money. That takes every opportunity it can to flaunt and signal to those around each other that they have money, whether it's a bigger house, a bigger car, nicer clothes, newest cell phone. Not that because they can afford it, not because we can afford it, not because it's needed, but it's because there's this value associated and there's this love of money that comes before a love of God. The purpose we have for our worldly wealth, the reasons we spend it, the goals we have for it, how we aim to use it. Is it for ourselves? Is it for my own consumption? Or can I bless someone else who doesn't have something? Maybe someone who's an outcast in this community. And by doing so, make a friend. And maybe they might believe there are people that adhere to grace as opposed to judgment, and it might lead them to an altered eternity. Because they happen to encounter a Jesus that in us, because we were wise with how we invested our money. Right? This is what Jesus is saying. Right? He said, truly I say, make friends of others today with the temporary worldly wealth so that you might be welcomed to eternity. The idea being that the person you made a friendship with is there because now they've gotten to know Jesus. The purpose we have for our worldly wealth reveals the master we serve. Right? The purpose we have for our worldly wealth reveals the master we serve. And I know money is a taboo topic. It's uncomfortable. But we devoted ourselves to studying the words of Jesus. Right? We devoted ourselves to say, like, what did he say? What does that mean for us? And he talks about money. And he's talked about it a few times. And he talks about it in the sense of not give me more so that I can expand my ministry, but what does how you spend your money reveal about who you're following? What does it reveal about your heart? What does it reveal about the master that you serve? What does it reveal about your perspective on the world and how your impact now might alter someone's impact for eternity? The Pharisees, who loved money, right? And Jesus just said you can either serve one master or the other. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. They were murmuring about the outcasts that were there, and they were sneering at him because he was talking about money, and he was stepping on their toes. And he said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts." You know, God knows what's going on in there. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Right? The previous 3 parables, each and every one of them highlighted what God gets excited about. You know what God celebrates and rejoices? The lost that come back to him. The restoration of those that are far from him to a relationship with him. That's worth getting excited about. That makes God do the happy dance because it's a snow day that I talked about last week. I talked about how there's nothing more excited, like no one is more excited than a teacher that gets a snow day, especially on her first year. And I just picture God doing that happy dance that my wife does when she gets a snow day. All right? God is delighted when those who are far, those who are outcasts, those who are judged, those who are brokenhearted and so far away, when they come back and they have a relationship with him. So much so that he detests money that is used for improper means, for temporary situations, when it could be used in a way that brings more people back to him. All right? He's talking about a mind shift change, a different perspective, an eternal perspective. It's one of the things he's constantly pushing on his disciples to change. It's not just about now. It's not just about getting to the next week or whatever. It's about an eternal kingdom focus on building something that's bigger and beyond yourself. So here's some points, and like I said, we'll be back next week, and we'll take another layer off, and we'll keep going. Because it's good stuff. So God's priorities are different than the world's, right? God's priorities are different than the world's priorities. Second, how we treat our wealth should be different. And if you're like, I don't have wealth, figure out how to be faithful in that little. I got a few nods there. Okay, like just as Jesus said, like if we're faithful with the little, that opens up the opportunity for him to bless you with more, that you can also prove your faithfulness. Now, this is not some quick scheme, right? I'm not saying, if you tithe your money, then all of a sudden you will get more. I'm not laying it out like that. What I am saying is that God blesses those that are faithful. All right? Those that invest in things and spend and use their resources in a way that delights him. And how we treat our wealth. And it's not just money, although this is the specific example, and it definitely applies to money, but our time, our talents, the things we're good at that other people aren't, the thing you're like, why don't you see that? Because I obviously see it, and everyone's like, what are you talking about, right? Those types of talents, how you use them, it should be different than the world. It should not just be something we do for our own benefit, but it's given to us for a blessing for others, and to figure out how we can impact the world and the reality for eternity. And since we have been talking specifically about money and wealth and love of God or love of money, I think the question often is I'm so overwhelmed, I don't know where to start, right? What do I do? And each and every one is in a different place and has a different financial situation. And And all I would say, and if you have questions and would like to actually sit down and work through stuff, I would gladly do that. But don't fall into the trap of like, I'm so overwhelmed, so I'll just do it later. Just start someplace. Pick something. Pick some way in which you can say, I'm doing this, God, to show you that everything I have is yours. Right? The idea of a tithe that is kind of goes throughout Scripture. You see it with Abraham. You see Jesus kind of pushing back on the Pharisees because they're tithing like herbs but not tithing the rest of their stuff. The idea of I give a part of everything I have to you as an offering, as a symbol that everything is actually mine. Figure out what that is for you. Figure out what makes sense for you in a way in which you can give to God. Invest in something that is beyond you, beyond just your immediate family, to develop friendships, to develop His kingdom as a symbol of devoting everything to Him. Right. And that may be your neighbor can't afford to pay the gas bill, and you pay it for them, and you don't let them know. You love them, and you care for them, and there's no strings attached. I just want you to love you and care for you. Obviously, give to your church. The reality is your church needs money to operate. Yes. I don't have you can look at it either way. I mean, there is not a hard set laying out of you should give 10% this way. There is not an accounting chapter in the book. In fact, you don't see anywhere in Scripture where it says you should tithe. It's an understood ritual in which people submit to authority over them by giving a tenth of what they have. Like Abraham did that when he encountered Melchizedek. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yes. Right. So here, I want to react too. So I think unfortunately sometimes tithe gets taught in the sense that if you do this, it equates more monetary gain for you in the future. I don't necessarily see, I think you will be blessed. I think it is an act of submitting to God as a symbol of this part represents all of mine, and if you ask me to give up this job to go over here, then I will, and this 10% represents that. And I am fully convinced that God can take what we bring to Him and what we, blessing over. You were talking about this earlier, and we give to Him and pray over and commit to His use. He can multiply it to fill whatever need we need. So I that's kind of where I would teach from. The right. The point that I feel Jesus is making here is this is a heart issue, right? Where is our priority? The reality is, unless our actions are actually following through with what we say our heart is, then probably our heart isn't actually there. It's okay. There's a difference between saying something that's true and then adjusting our behavior to actually follow through with it, right? Right. There's a difference between belief and faith. I can believe that if I stop eating excess food, then I'll lose weight, right? I can believe that. But unless I actually stop eating that food, right, I'm not putting my faith in that truth, and it doesn't follow through. And so there is, in no way am I trying to say, there isn't merit in the act, but what I feel like Jesus is saying, that the heart behind it, what the outcome is, are we checking where our priorities are? What's the guiding priorities? What do we love? What is that action? And are we acting out of that reality? Yeah. So hopefully, all that to come back, and we're going to sit on this next week and take another layer off. We got to start somewhere. I mean, how do you get to there? Well, you have to take a step. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what your first step is. If you'd like to sit down and talk, we can come up with ideas. But what would it look like? How do you need to change the way you view your wealth? How do you need to use your wealth for eternal purposes, right? How do you develop friendships with what you have so that they might be wooed to a loving God who is so desperate for them, right? How do you invest in things that have an impact beyond just our own consumption, which is so easy to come into? And if you're at a point where you don't have anything extra, then what are the other blessings in your life? And how can you start there? How can you be faithful with that so that you can then bless other people? And that they can be wooed to a loving God who's desperate for them because they see a love in you that is not of you, but it is of a loving God. And then watch how God uses that faithfulness as opportunities to be faithful in more things. So here's the question. I'm going to let it set. Like I said, we'll be back here next week because this is good stuff. It's hard, but it's good. So here's the question. How do you need to use your wealth for eternal purposes? Heavenly Father, we love your Son, but man, does he say things that are disturbing at times. Thank you for that. Thank you for disrupting us. Thank you for being a God that sees us and is willing to disrupt us, not for the sake of disrupting us or disturbing us, but for the sake of inviting us into more. Imagine the purpose and the sense of purpose we could share and partake in if we actually believed we could have eternal impact. That the things that are currently on our plate, they could be used for so much more. They could change the way our children grow up amongst us. They could change our neighbor. All because we took something temporary and used it in a different way. Help us to think outside the box on this. Help us to be excited by what could happen. Help us to not just get so caught up on our own little things and envision how we might be a blessing to those around us. How we might use the things that you've blessed us with to change the world around us. Help us in this. Help us to envision what that kingdom impact could be. Help us as we go into next week and we get together and we discuss that very thing. What does it look like for our church to use what we have, what you've given us, to have eternal impact on those here and those outside and those across this world? You do amazing things with things that are insufficient, and we feel insufficient for sure. Thank you for that. Thank you for this challenging parable. I pray that it disrupts our week, that we think about it, it challenges us, and we come back next week and you help us to reveal another layer that lets us see deeper and wider on what you're saying on this. Thank you for inviting us into this and being a God that loves us and cares for us and is overwhelmed with compassion when you see us. Thank you for that. Thank you for the proof of that on the cross. In Jesus' name, amen.